Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You are welcome to the OTL2020 Session on the theme Post-Deregulation, Agenda for Nigerian Downstream Petroleum. This session will focus on the imperative of establishing a legal framework and guidelines for liberalized industry operations, redefining the roles of regulatory agencies, and sustainability of open market principles in Nigeria's downstream petroleum sector. For an industry that has spent the better part of the last decade clamoring for full deregulation, whether the glass is half full or half empty is certainly up for intense debate. The moderator for this session is Mr. Fabian Ajogu, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Senior Partner, Kenna Partners. Mr. Ajogu is a Lagos Business School Professor of Corporate Governance. He is an alumnus of the Said Business School of Oxford University and an alumnus of the Lagos Business School. He holds a doctorate degree in law from University of Aberdeen, Scotland, an MBA from the IEC Business School, Barcelona, and law degrees from the University of Nigeria and University of Lagos. The learned senior advocate has been lead counsel to the federal government of Nigeria in several cases of national importance, and he is the author of several books. Professor Ajogu chaired the Nigerian Communications Commission's Committee on Corporate Governance that produced the first NCC Code of Corporate Governance for the telecommunications sector in 2014. He serves on the Financial Reporting Council of Nigeria 2018 Technical Committee on the National Code of Corporate Governance. He is a Fellow of the Society for Corporate Governance Nigeria, a Fellow of the Nigerian Institute of Chartered Arbitrators, Fellow of the African Leadership Initiative West Africa, Henry Crown Global Leadership of the Aspen Institute, and a Fellow of the AIFA Reading Society. He serves on the board of the Lagos Court of Arbitration, the Governing Council of the Nigerian Institute of Chartered Arbitrators, and the Governing Council of the Pan-Atlantic University, Lagos Business School. He served as a member of the General Council of the Bar and the Council of Legal Education, Nigerian Law School. Professor Ajogu is a member of the London Court of International Arbitration and a member of the Lagos Court of Arbitration, listed on its panel of neutrals. He is also a member of the International Council for Commercial Arbitration. Speakers for this session are Mr. Clement Isong, Executive Secretary, Major Oil Marketers Association of Nigeria, MOMAN, a Nigerian lawyer called to the Nigerian bar in 1982. Mr. Clement Isong retired from Total Group as Deputy Vice President for Southern Africa. He served in that capacity between 2013 and 2017 and oversaw the interface between Total Group's head office departments in Paris and their downstream affiliates in South Africa, Mozambique, Malawi, Zimbabwe, and Zambia. Mr. Hoob Stockman, Managing Director at OVH Energy Marketing Limited. He is an energetic and performance-driven business leader with over 25 years professional experience. Prior to this appointment, Mr. Stockman was the head of Puma Energy International in Angola and was responsible for the overall business. Before joining Puma, he spent over 20 years at British Petroleum, during which time he was responsible for sales and marketing as well as major projects across 15 European countries. Mr. Adetunji Oyebanji, Chairman, Major Oil Marketers Association of Nigeria, MOMAN. Mr. Oyebanji spent more than 37 years in Mobil Oil across several countries, eventually becoming its chairman and CEO in Nigeria. When the company divested its Nigerian interests to NIPCO Limited, he became and remains the managing director and CEO of the newly created company 11 PLC. Mr. Emeka Akabogu, Senior Partner, Akabogu and Associates. Mr. Akabogu is a widely recognized expert in the field of maritime law in Nigeria. He holds law degrees from the University of Lagos, the University College London, and the IMO International Institute of Maritime Law, Malta. He is a recipient of the prestigious British Chevening Scholarship, a Fellow of the Chartered Institute of Shipping, a member of the Board of Governors of the Center of Petroleum Information, and currently serves as the Executive Council of the Nigerian Maritime Law Association as Honorary Secretary. Mr. Austin Olorunshola, Chairman of the Energy Institute, Nigeria. He's a skilled petroleum engineer who has worked at Ajib E&I and SPDC Limited, where he served in several positions before retiring as Vice President Gas. Mr. Austin then served Nigeria as Director, Department of Petroleum Resources, DPR, drawing from his experience as advisor to 2 Ministers of Petroleum Resources. Mr. Austin is currently Chairman, Energy Institute, and Director, Fortune Engineering Nigeria Limited.
Issues of pricing, and of course, law and policy. Today, we'll also be talking about aspirations on when that PIB, Petroleum Industry Bill, will transit to a PIA, Petroleum Industry Act, and what should be the agenda post that. The issues of market forces versus price fixing will also be explored by your panelists this morning. And then we would see whether indeed there exists some sort of conflict between the person fixing price for the consumers, who are also voters, have some political leverage. These are the issues that we intend to explore this morning. But first, I must thank OTL for organizing this and for being consistent even with the challenges of the COVID-19. But I dare say the quality has even become better. And I dare say thumbs up to our very enlightened visionary, Mr. Mecca Akabo. And I have to start this morning by simply just going straight to the business of the day. And so our first panelist and speaker, whom I have the honor and privilege to invite to take the screen, is Mr. Hob Stockman. Hob Stockman is the Chief Executive Officer of OVH Energy. You will be listening to excellent insights from him touching on competition and other issues on the subject. Mr. Stockman, most welcome.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for the introduction. I would ask OTL to put the first slide on, if they can, because I don't think you're joined to see my face. I think you probably want some more content while they are loading it up. So I'll touch upon, I think we will all touch upon several aspects, and I think you will probably find that some of the presentations are slightly overlapping. But I think actually the messages, sometimes repetition of messages makes the message only stronger instead of saying it only once. So while I'm patiently waiting for OTL to put the slide on, so I'll touch upon a couple of topics. But I think some of them will be deeper, let's say, looked at a later point. Now, I'm being challenged here by keep on talking to you while I think they're trying to do I'm trying to get the slide on. OTL, can you put it on, or do I need to take control myself and do it myself? All right. My apologies, ladies and gentlemen. That's technology for you. We're all getting used to virtual conferences. I think in about a year's time, I hope we do normal face-to-face conferences again. But in case we stay to this, I'm sure we're going to be all so much better in a year's time with this. All right, I might.
That's fine. You may want to try seeing if you can share it.
Okay, the OTL let me know that they'll come up any second now. So they're messaging me now. But I think it's an exciting time for the downstream industry. The government has very clearly stated their intention to let's say from a downstream perspective in the new PIB to deregulate the market. I think at the moment they have already, of course, removed more or less all subsidies on the product. But removing subsidy on the product is not the same as a deregulation. Deregulation needs to be enshrined by law. And that's where I think all of us are eagerly awaiting the petroleum industry bill, which is I think is with the National Assembly, and I think is going through its first or second reading now. We as industry are, of course, asked to provide our input, and of course in every bill there are always positives and things that you really like and things that you would like to see maybe slightly improved, and we will provide that input. And sessions like this might only sharpen our common understanding and our ability to provide input to the National Assembly on maybe some areas where we are really fully in support and some areas where we might want to go. Excellent. All right. So can we please go to the next slide immediately? All right. Thank you very much. So just as a reminder, I think the number has been gone through quite a few times now. I think the slide is not fully showing, so we'll have to go through this a little bit as we do it. One way the format is lost, but okay, I'll take you through it. So you've heard the number of 10 trillion of loss through subsidies, or the cost of the subsidy in the last 10-15 years on product. And I think we all know, and it's been said that money could have been spent on other things. And I think things that would have been long-term, instead of subsidizing consumption, because that's basically what you do when you subsidize a product that is consumed, like PMS, you could have done, the government could have done things which are more infrastructural. And here you just see a couple of the examples. Over 20,000 kilometers of roads could have been built, hopefully well built, and sustain the continuous growth of the country. And over 600,000 new houses could have been built or supported financially with mortgages. Electricity, a major topic also, of course, for Nigeria. 27,000 megawatts of solar electricity could have been added to the national grid. Or from a healthcare point of view, over 300,000 fully equipped primary healthcare centers could have been done. It just shows you yes, and it's not just the benefit loss, but of course these kind of subsidies potentially also lead to corruption, to waste, inefficiencies, and it actually excludes the losses on forex, because the government didn't only subsidize basically the PMS, but in a way they also subsidize it with forex. But I think we all know these numbers, but I just wanted to bring back to you why deregulate. Next slide, please. Now, I think it's crucial to have an effective downstream deregulation, and which has now been removed. You basically need to have building blocks. And my apologies that the slide is not coming up very well, but I'll have to talk through it then. And basically, there are three major building blocks. One is, you can see, the fair market. I'll come back to that. Consumer protection. And what you cannot see in the red bottom block, sound legislation. Because I think that's the key thing. I just already mentioned, you can remove the subsidy, but if you don't change the legislation, it could come back anytime. So it's extremely important that the legislation that's built around the deregulation is enforceable, is in some way adaptable to changing business environment. I think the law needs to be able to play into the future. And it is a sound foundation, the legislation. But I think further speakers will come back to some of the legislation elements. Next slide, please. So if you look at the legislation, and I'm sure it will come a little bit more further back, but it's a bedrock of any deregulation. And as I said already, it needs to be an act of parliament, not pronouncements by the executive government. It has to clearly include that the government will not intervene in price determination. And that's a crucial point in it. It also means that we have to repeal quite a few current legislations that are currently linked to, let's say, the regulation of the price. being a PPRA, being it PEF, being the NMPC Amendments Act, etc. So it's not only about introducing new legislation, but also repealing old one. If you truly want to do this, you have to discontinue the price equalization fund mechanism. If you truly want price mechanisms to do a fair pricing across the country. And the agencies that currently are there, and there are a couple of them are mentioned, PPRA, PEF, DPR, you'll have to repurpose them. The good thing is quite a few of these things have been included in the legislation. So I must say that quite a few of these recommendations, or what you would say, things that have to happen, have been included. Next slide, please. Now, the other crucial element is that you need to have a fair and transparent market. It's one thing to deregulate, but you also have to have a fair and transparent market. And it's all about, including the NMPC, all about operating on a level playing field. Yeah, because if there's no level playing field, market distortions will happen, maybe not immediately, but certainly over time. And what are the three key elements of a fair and transparent market? One is prices, the second one is Forex, and the third one is infrastructure. And let me start with prices. I think it's very clear, and many of you know my background. I come from markets that have been deregulated for decades. It is always the forces of demand and supply should be the ones to determine the price of PMS. There's no other way of doing it. Yeah. Marketers should be able to fix the prices of the pump based on their own structure and efficiencies. So there will be not one price at each and the same between marketers, prices might be differently, and even within marketers, actually prices might be different in different regions. And the NMPC, who at the moment is still both a regulator in a way and a competitor, yeah, they also have to be, basically their prices needs to be commercially based in order to promote fair competition. Yeah. And I think that's a crucial part, that the NMPC needs to abide to the same rules that any other market player should operates within the market. One crucial element of it, and I come to the next one, is Forex. Yeah. Forex should be made available to all companies at the same rates. Yeah. To support a level playing field. If people have different, you can figure it out for yourself, but if people have different Forexes, then that will again lead to market distortion. So all marketers should have access to the same exchange rate for dollars to import fuel, and that should be fair, and that should also be transparent. Yeah. And then finally, infrastructure. Access to the government-owned logistics infrastructure, being it jetties, pipelines, storage, should be transparent, equal, and equitable. Yeah, and that means that everybody needs to have access at the same terms, and that NMPC, as a major player also in the market and currently an owner, should basically charge the same rates to their own internal companies as they would do to any competitor. And the fees should be very clearly used for the maintenance and upgrade of the distribution infrastructure. I think we all know that pipelines are a very efficient way of transporting fuel throughout Nigeria. And I think they all desperately need some investments. And I'm sure that's been mentioned in some of the other sessions. But the fees that are charged for the usage of the pipelines, for those that are operating, should be used for maintenance and upgrade of the distribution, be it pipelines, being it depots, or what there is. And I think that's a crucial part of a fair and transparent market. So prices, Forex, and infrastructure. Then last but not least, next slide, please. Competition or consumer protection. Because of course, there's always a lot of hesitation or fear around pricing. Will prices at the pump be calculated in a fair and transparent way? And I think for all the markets that I worked in the past, there's always a consumer protection or a competitive authority there, that has the empowerment to check unfair practices in the industry, to protect consumers, but also actually ensures that the market is fair for all operators. It comes back a little bit to this the level playing field. And that body should be basically look at four things. Yeah, the price monitoring and making sure that indeed our prices are fair and there is no price gouging. They need to look at the competition in the market. Yeah, making sure there are no predatory business practices and that the competition between all the players is fair. And it comes back to the previous elements that I've discussed: the fair and transparent market. It should enforce compliance with technical and product standards, because even that is important for the consumer. Yeah, everybody can trust the product that they get and the quality and the quantity they get here in Nigeria, and have the ability to sanction. Because if you violate, it doesn't make sense if you violate and there's no sanction. So where there is price gouging, where there is predatory business practices, where people are not adhering to standards, the agency or the department or the body, whoever we want to call it, has the ability to sanction. And I think in the current draft of the PIB, I think there are one or two things that could be improved on that one. That in a very short overview would be my contribution in terms of the new downstream deregulation that hopefully is imminent, and our view of what needs to happen. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Stockman, for those insights on the competition aspects and the other points that you raised, pricing and so on. Just before I call on the next panelist, perhaps it's right to share with you, the CEO of a downstream operator once said to us at the Lagos Business School that he enjoys more selling chicken, as in chicken, more than the fuel which he was actually licensed to sell. And everybody wondered why, until he said, well, nobody controlled the price of the chicken on the run, but somebody controlled the price of the pump price of the fuel in the front room. So that precursor of that organization is 11 PLC. That managing director was Mr. Olu Onakoye of Mobil Oil, Nigeria. So I'm going to be taking you next to the managing director of 11 PLC, Mr. Adetunji Oyebanji, who will talk to us about the concept of self-regulation and loop all the issues in the post-deregulation scenario to this audience. So Oyebanji, you're most welcome.
Good morning, Fabian. Good morning, other presenters, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here again with you this morning. Hugh has taken us through a lot that has to do with the regulation, the kind of environment that we need post the regulation as far as official regulation is concerned. My presentation is going to focus a bit more on the issues of self-regulation. Where does self-regulation come into this whole thing? I will take you through a few slides that will highlight the issues involved in that area. So essentially, I will be talking about the various associations that exist within the industry. I will then be taking us and looking at the imperative of self-regulation in the downstream. I will give some examples of offshore associations and how they regulate. And then finally, I will try and set some kind of agenda for the associations in the downstream as far as self-regulation is concerned. So just bear with me for 1 second while I bring up my presentation. Now, okay, let's start with this. What you have here are a collection of various associations across the spectrum of the economy in Nigeria. Association of industry players in manufacturing, the Nigerian Employers Consultative Association, the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. All these various entities regulate themselves in one way or the other, making sure that apart from regulation that comes from government agencies or as determined by legislation, they themselves set up yardstick, they set up charters that guide their operations and guide the activities of their members. Now, why is this? In the oil industry, first and foremost, you know, we have been clamoring and advocating for deregulation for many, many, many years. I personally have been in that whole process for at least 20 years. And now we have found ourselves in a situation where government has finally listened and has decided to go in this direction. But now we get to the point where it's just like somebody who has been clamoring for something for a long time. You have now been given that opportunity. Self-discipline, which is another word or another way of describing self-regulation, needs to come in. Oil industry across the world, I mean, even in fully deregulated markets like the US and in Europe, oil sometimes has always had a bad name. They call it big oil. People, because they don't understand how prices are arrived at, and because this is a product that they really do not have any choice but to buy, are never very happy. The complaint is always that the prices go up too quickly, and when they are supposed to go down, they do not go down fast enough. So it's always an issue, and therefore the need for self-discipline and self-regulation becomes very, very imperative. And as you will see with all these various entities, it is very clear that self-regulation by way of their means of operation or modes of operation becomes very, very important. Now, throughout history, obviously, the Nigerian petroleum industry has also been very vulnerable to corruption, sharp practices, and definitely, while regulation can do something about that from a perspective of legislation, what you yourself do as members, what you accept from your members in terms of how they operate becomes very, very critical. For instance, you know, for instance, that under a regulated environment where maybe there's only one person supplying, then you find that somebody who is sitting somewhere and is the one who is allocating products to everybody and apart from smuggling, it is this corruption that has been one of the reasons why we have long advocated for this deregulation of the industry. Now, Cube has talked a lot about regulation. He's talked about the PIB. But this doesn't mean that, as we've always said, when people talk about deregulation, sometimes people have the misconception that we meant that there would be no regulation in the industry. Huber's talking about it extensively, so I'm not going to waste too much time on it. But what I will say of good is that self-regulation, which is a form of regulation, and fills the gap in addressing the industry's non-adherence to international standards and best practices. All these are aimed at ensuring safe operations in the sector and building self-confidence and trust in the industry. Now, many times when people talk about marketers in Nigeria, they use the word interchangeably. There are several associations within the industry. Of course, you have Moman, which is the major oil marketers. You have Ipman, which is the independent marketers. You have DAPMAN, which is the depot and petroleum products marketers. You have the Nigerian Liquefied Petroleum Gas Association. And you have Petron, which is more for retail outlet owners. So invariably, all these various associations within the industry will need to brace up and look at ways of self-regulation so that over and beyond what is prescribed by PIB, they themselves, in terms of their charter and their modus operandi, will themselves self-regulate. Now, let me talk a bit about what we have in some other countries. For instance, in South Africa, we have SAPIA, which is the South African Petroleum Industry Association. And essentially, what about 96% of service stations within that geography are essentially carriers of the SAPIA brand. So they are all members of that association. And really, their role is to promote industry transformation, to facilitate the security of supply of petroleum products. It's to promote health, safety, security, and the environment within the industry, which is very, very key. And therefore, in terms of how they operate, it is very clear that all their members must maintain certain standards of operation. They provide input into the development of climate change policy and regulation. They engage the Department of Environmental Affairs and legislation and work with governments just to drive the whole concept of regulation. It should work within that geography. Another example is the Petroleum Institute of East Africa. Again, part of their objectives are to lobby with policymakers and forum for interaction between the industry and various stakeholders, carrying out public safety education and awareness on petroleum-related subjects. So again, you see these various institutions are there to, if you will, direct and self-regulate their members so that they are regulators as determined by the legislation within those countries. I will also talk about the American Petroleum Institute, which again is a well-known institution that has to do with petroleum standards, not only within the United States, but indeed across the world. It represents all segments of America's oil and gas industry. It was formed in 1919 as a standard-setting organization. The association has developed more than 700 standards to enhance operational and environmental safety, efficiency, and sustainability. Many of the standards, which incorporated into state and federal regulations and are widely cited standards by international regulatory community. So in essence, what it's saying is that this organization, again, is providing input into even some of the policies, guidelines that are made by the official regulator. And this is something we would like to see going forward in Nigeria, where you would find the associations, the industry associations, contributing and making input into guidelines and standards that come out from the official regulator. Now, as we move towards the end of my presentation, I've kind of drawn up a few issues here that I believe could serve, as it were, as action points for the downstream association going forward. So first and foremost, there would be need to develop, where they do not exist, charters setting out the framework, the do's and don'ts for operators of their associations and their members, with focus on things like HSCQ, corporate governance, integrity, excellent service delivery actions to be taken, and penalties for erring members who do not abide by the standards and guidelines that are enclosed in the Charter. Clearly stated methods of implementation of the Charter rules, for example, periodic visits to members' terminals or retail outlets or other facilities to assess standards, operation, quality, and safety. Periodic testing of products to ensure adherence with agreed specifications. So these kind of things would be how I believe these associations, it will be more like an action plan as we move towards this formal and fully legislated regulatory environment that we are going into. And finally, what will be the role of the downstream regulator? Working with the industry associations, I think the regulator, especially as in the new PIB, what you will see is there is going to be a regulator for the downstream as opposed to what we have today, where there's only one regulator for both the upstream, the midstream, and the downstream. So with the kind of focus that this new regulator should have, they will coordinate, obviously, activities within the industry. A lot of what they should be doing should be to collaborate and consult with the industry to ensure that the rules set for the industry are apt and appropriate and are such that they have the buy-in and input of all stakeholders within the industry. The regulator would also have the role of intervening and taking appropriate action if any anti-competition, antitrust rules are broken by the industry. Again, that was something already covered by Hugh, so I will not dwell into that in detail. So with that, this is all I wanted to contribute to the discussion. I'll be glad to take questions later. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Yebanji, for those insights into the whole concept of self-regulation, which is really the way to go as other advanced markets have. I will take special note of those action points in terms of charters, codes of conduct and behavior, corporate governance, developing HSEQ issues, and of course, sanctions where there are infractions. I will now invite the next panelist who has, again, walked the talk. And when we talk about markets, the marketer will be providing us with a market definition. So I'm happy to invite Mr. Clement Isong, the Executive Secretary of Major Oil Marketers Association of Nigeria, MOMAN. Mr. Isong, welcome to the stage.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me. Could the Secretary please put up my slides? Thank you. We go to the first slide, please. The next slide. Okay. So what we are trying to do here, could you go back, please, by one slide? Could you go back by one slide, please? Yes. So what we've tried to show here are the different distribution models prevalent in Nigeria. So the first that we have referred to here is what we call the NOC, the National Oil Company in Nigeria, that is the NNPC, which is involved in every single line of the supply chain. They are in exploration, production, refining, trading, importation, transportation, all the way up to retailing of the products. Then we have the second business model, which is the depot sales model. Perhaps you want me to manage my presentation by myself. Is there a problem? So we have the depot sales model, which is they are involved in the importation, or they buy and they sell petroleum products mostly through their ex-depots. Can I see the presentation, please? Mostly through the ex-depot sales channel. This could be through either NPSC or NNPC or other depots. We then have the retail sales model. Basically, you might own a filling station or lease a filling station or a couple of filling stations, and quite often road transport. And you buy from depots and you sell your product through your filling station. Managing one filling station is very complicated. Managing 5 to 10 filling stations is a lot more complicated. Once you get to managing 100, 200 filling stations, you really need IT in order to be able to manage and control your sales. And then finally, we have the integrated business model. The operators are represented throughout or in major aspects of the supply chain. They import, they run their depots, they manage transportation, and they sell through the distribution, through the retail outlets, and they sell to industrial customers. There are other operators in the industry. We have quite a number of refineries coming on board, apart from the Dangote refinery. We have a few modular refineries, which are due to stream in the next couple of months or years. We have traders who are simply involved in the bulk purchase of and transport of crude sometimes, or refined products. We have shippers in the industry as well, whose vessels are designed for the transport of crude or refined products. And then we finally have bulk road transporters in the industry as well, whose business is to transport products. It should have been the last mile, where we have pipelines. But in Nigeria, because most of the pipelines are not working, they are involved in long distance transportation, or what we call bridging in the industry. So these are the various business models currently in the industry, and which the new legislation, the new regulator would need to regulate. Can we move to the next slide, please? So, in preparing the future of the industry, my colleagues Hugh and my chairman Tunji have spoken about practical, pragmatic aspects of the industry. I want to go a little bit upstream into the philosophy. The National Petroleum Policy, which was approved by the Federal Executive Council in 2017, is an excellent, excellent document. And I wish very many in the industry, very many investors in the industry, and very many people who work for the regulators have not read this document, even though the document was prepared within the Ministry of Petroleum Affairs. What recommends this document is the thinking that has gone into its preparation. It's a very intellectual document and stands on its own feet. It explains the basis of the issues that it deals with. It speaks to Nigeria's ambition. It speaks to Nigeria's objectives. It speaks to what crude oil and its beneficiation can do for the country and for the country's economy. So, if you move to the next slide, I have picked a few quotes to lead our conversation. So, from that document, that is a quote. Around the world, technical standards are usually developed by industry in consultation Standards are produced by technical standard committees of the industry association, which are made up of representatives of the industry. So going back to what Tunji Oyebanji was saying, what we need is to have the industry associations engage with the regulator to develop the technical standards and regulation. Regulation in areas such as HSE, regulations in areas such as product quality, regulations in areas such as customer satisfaction or customer protection, regulation in areas such as corporate governance and investments. In any case, it is only corporate governance, adequate corporate governance, that will encourage local or international investors to invest in equity in your business. It also talks about investments in human resources development, extensively on that. And then we have seen in this conference a lot of, I remember Uya Kwata's presentation, which spoke a lot on information technology. In order to improve our efficiency, a lot of integration of information technology, and this must be led, working together, because quite a number of the technologies will be interdependent. So the regulator needs to work with industry towards ensuring that the safety, technical, and quality standards are consistent. Can we move to the next slide, please? Next slide, please. So I come back to the question of efficiency and cost optimization, which this document also refers to. And these are quotes from the document. We haven't done very well, as everybody has pointed out, in the past, not just the recent past, but for 20, 30 years. The petroleum sector has been dominated by state ownership and dominant market power. Consequently, the private sector has been constrained, I would say pushed out of the business. The lack of regulatory rigor and absence of governance in cost efficiency. As a result, state control and rent seeking has limited the growth of self-sustaining industries. This is a quote from that document. The intention of the policy is to avoid duplication and unnecessary costs. If we are going to be competitive, if we are going to keep our prices down, then we need to speak to scale, economies of scale. And then we also need to have a holistic look, a holistic view of the question of taxes and levies. Too many times we have too many people whose sole intention is to put their hands in your pocket. There are people who impose taxes and levies at federal level, at state level, at local government level. Even the local area boys want to put their hands in your pocket. We need to have some clarity if we want to keep the business running. Remember that it is a high volume, low margin business. If we want this business to evolve, to grow. So again, this document has thought in terms of increasing our efficiency level and improving organization. Again, I come back to the use of IT. And finally, can we move to my next slide, which will be my last slide. Next slide, please. So as we move towards refining, I like this map. What this map shows you, these are the pipelines in Africa. What you find is Nigeria has historically had a pretty good investment in pipelines. The black pipelines are the pipelines for crude, and the red pipelines are the pipelines for refined products. As you can see, Nigeria is represented in both the black pipeline that used to take product to Kaduna and the red pipelines which distributed products throughout the country. The use of these pipelines, the reason why we are unable to use them is because we've gotten the economics wrong. The industry has not been self-sustaining as a result of price regulation, which never took into account the recovery of costs. in setting the agenda going forward, we need to get the economics of refining right. Too many people are expecting that the refineries will buy crude at lower than the international price. That would be a mistake. There has to be full cost recovery when it comes to distribution as well. We need to get the economics right if we're going to take full benefit from the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. Again, we need to invest significantly in getting our logistics optimization right. There are some things that the law can do for us. There are other things that we need to do collectively as an industry. And this comes with the industry working hand in hand, collaborating with the regulator so that our market, our products can be competitive and we can become the center for refining, the refining hub for West and Central Africa. We need to get the industry profile right. When Tunji was talking about the question of we have a bad reputation, this bad reputation is not just in our industry, it's for the country. We need to focus on HSEQ, because if we don't profile ourselves, we will be unable to sell. Customers will refuse to buy from you if you do not have a good HSE record. So we need to get the product quality right as well. There was a discussion the other day where we heard that we're going to rebuild the refineries in phase 1, and then in phase 2, we will upgrade. You know, there's no point reinventing the wheel. We have standards are being set in Africa for the quality of products, from 50 ppm sulfur moving to 10 ppm sulfur. There is no point building a refinery or rebuilding refineries today that will not provide the quality of products that will meet the local and international specifications. And this is what the regulator will have to do, working side by side with industry. It will need to imagine that future and work with industry towards being competitive on the continent, providing products that meet the need of Nigerians and the continent in the future. And then we love the push for gas, but we need to get the economics and the policies right also. And the best way of doing this is coming back to what Tunji said. We need to collaborate, regulator and industry. The regulator needs to coordinate to make sure that in line with the objectives that have been set in the petroleum policy, we are moving consistently in the right direction. These are, and we need to consult consistently to make sure that wherever we offline, that we are all aligned and working together towards the Nigerian objective for the industry. This is what we need to do. This must be the agenda going forward, working together, industry and policymakers and regulators. Thank you very much. That is my presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Isang, for those very useful insights. I particularly delighted about the, yes. Thank you, Mr. Isang, for those very useful insights. I'm particularly delighted about the conclusions which touch on the importance of getting the economics of refining and distribution right, getting the logistics optimization right in order to remain competitive And of course, getting the industry products and the product mix right. And lastly, gas. It's important that we do this in order to be true to the economics of downstream operations, because it is difficult to serve a meal in Port Harcourt for 1,000 naira and then transport the meal by the caterer to Jos and sell it for the same 1,000 naira. Someone has to pay that cost somehow. Mm-hmm. This is part of the importance of getting the economics right, as Mr. Isong had brilliantly exposed in his presentation. It now leads me to invite the next panelist, who's the chairman of the Energy Institute, Mr. Austin Olorushola, who will be talking to us about policy and law as they affect the downstream deregulation and sort of insights into what that agenda should be, perhaps in 2021. He seems to have some clairvoyance in believing that the PIB will sooner or later become a PIA, but I'll leave him to share his insights on the subject. You're most welcome, Mr. Olorushola.
Thank you, Prof. If you believe in God, everything is possible. So thank you for allowing me to participate in this debate this morning. Just as Prof has said, really, I believe with great optimism, a lot of prayer and fasting, I think the current bill called the PIB 2020 will certainly make it to become an act by 2021. Can I have my slide on, please? Thank you. Yeah, thank you. So if you just move to the next one. The next one, yeah. So like I said, I believe certainly with a lot of hard work too, we will be having a new Petroleum Industry Act by 2021. Next slide. So I thought that what I should then be talking around today in terms of post-deregulation agenda should be more around the legislative as well as commercial space. Which I have tried to bucket into three key subtopics. Next slide, please. So I'll start just to give you a very quick overview of what's in the PIB with respect to downstream mainly. And I'd like to go a little bit into discussions around the authority, which is the proposed regulator for this same downstream as well as in the midstream. And then I'll end up fleshing out what I see as a post-deregulation agenda. Next one, please. So, yeah, well, of course, you all know that we've gone through this reform journey for like 20 years. Finally, and very recently too, a new executive bill landed in the National Assembly in Parliament, and it's taken very, very seriously. In terms of timeline, so it's gone through first reading, and the last Tuesday, it also went through second reading in the Senate. Unfortunately, the House couldn't conclude their own second reading, but that's been planned even as I speak. I think the next major milestone is you're going to hear a call for public hearing. So I think and that will happen hopefully late November or very, very early December. So I will advise all of us around the table to please begin to get your memoranda together. Whatever you see are key gaps, but more importantly, the values that you can add to the existing bill I think that would be greatly appreciated. Next slide, please. I also thought that I should put this very much upfront. There are 10 key objectives of the bill, about 235-page document. Objectives 7 and 8 clearly are for the midstream as well as the downstream. Which basically points to the importance of this sector within the overall bill itself. Next slide. So for over 60 years, of course, we've all been very much very, very happy to stay completely in the upstream side of the business. But the true thing is that the value there is roughly 3 to 5% of a barrel. The real value, which we have been throwing away from the table, really, which are called missed opportunity, had always been mainly in the midstream and downstream. So it's so heartwarming at this point in time to really see that this bill this time around actually focuses more on both the midstream as well as the downstream, where I think it's a very good opportunity for us at this time. The next slide is just to show you a bit of the governance of it, really, in the sense that we now have a clear separation between policy owners, which is the minister or the ministry, the regulations, which is the Upstream Regulatory Commission, as well as the Midstream and Downstream Regulatory Authority, and then, of course, the commercial operators, which is all ourselves. The important thing here, again, unlike what we have today, which is just one single, if you like, whole industry regulator, we're going to have a very, very dedicated midstream as well as a downstream regulatory authority. Next slide. With the responsibility very, very clearly stated in the bill is for the technical as well as commercial regulation of the midstream as well as the downstream. So it's broad, it's all encompassing, and I mean, just like some of my panelists have said, we've been waiting for this for a very long time. Now it has come. Food is ready, basically. Let's just run with it. I thought I should also say a little bit about the objectives as well as the functions of this authority, which is in the next slide. It's quite a very long thing, but I've tried to bucket it into 6 key areas. The first is around licensing, and indeed, it's whoever gives license that really can follow up with regulating as well as enabling. So in terms of issuing permits or even calling it back or revocation, modifying and approving transfers and all that, all that is going to be resident with this authority. They will be maintained or be required to maintain public registers and records as well as data, both for the midstream as well as in the downstream. They will monitor and enforce quite a long a list of all that is including environmental laws, licenses, obligations, competition rules, which my panelists have also talked around. They will implement government policies for sure, at least being the first line for government. They will develop tariff methodologies, pricing methodologies, and investigate issues where there are. In terms of key roles and powers, I have them all as a dashboard in there, but I just want to touch on a few there. Again, granting and administering licenses is very key. Enforcing regulations, standards and codes, managing third-party access, because Mr. Stockman was talking around level playing field. This is basically how to make that happen. Enforcing customer protection is really key. Like I said, there's quite a long array of roles and the powers of this authority, but I think quite a lot of the aspirations of the industry have not just been spoken about now. It has actually been backed by legislative provisions in the bill. And I would again just advise, go through it very well and see if we can add values here and there. This is just a snapshot of the major licenses, between the midstream and downstream gas, as well as midstream and downstream liquids. There's quite a lot of several more, which I don't want to start reading out in here. We talked around transparency and accountability, and it's not just about saying it, but how to make it happen. So the bill also talks about quite a few things around making submissions either yearly or half yearly, publishing on the website, for example, things around default approval. So if you apply for something and it doesn't, you don't hear from the authority on time, there's a time it gets to, you consider it is approved and you just simply move on, So there's quite a lot of transparency and accountability provisions also in the bill that certainly speak to the ills of the sector as at today. So then what do I see as deregulation agenda? I see 6 core interventions. If you go to the next slide, the first is that there will be, like I said, there's going to be a dedicated and independent sector regulator. And I've heard all the qualities the industry will like. So they like them to coordinate, to collaborate, to consult. But I also add consequential sanctioning too. So it's both sides of the coin. I think one of the key things we will see post deregulation is product supply sourcing and the security of it. Or of course, maybe in the midterm, short to midterm, it will still be very heavily on importation and here and there. But over time, I think our aspiration is to go in the whole hog of actually refining everything here. I always say people forget that there's some time in this same country that we had self-sufficiency refined in this country to the extent that we are even exporting the excess of it. The third thing is open, transparent, and free market, and I think we've had so much about that across the table this morning. Customer delivery, Clement just talked about that in terms of efficiency, integrity, relationships generally, all that certainly I see that happening very much. We can't talk too little about HSE and quality. It's got to be fully, and I like the part around self-regulation, because frankly speaking, government policies, legislation usually may not capture everything. So it would be nice, really, just as Mr. Ibanji said, the industry itself, the sector itself, have some bit of self-regulation and discipline. And lastly, nobody talked about it yet, is in terms of strategic stock. I think we need to be looking at this very, very much. And the bill also talks around that a little bit. The next slide basically are things I see as critical success factors, some of which we have actually heard today. It's all about governance, making sure that the playing field is actually level for everybody. And I think Mr. Stockman talked so much about that. The sector must be allowed to operate commercially. Monopolist tendencies certainly have to be discouraged, and I actually say even severely penalized by revoking licenses, for example, if people try to do such a thing. Regulations itself must be enabling. It's not just about having roadblocks. They actually must enable the sector. And I think we've talked about collaboration as well as coordination. Hopefully, if we can get all this done, I see 6 key benefits. let's say in another year or two, by which time we will have fully gone into the implementation of the new law. I see improved economy and revenues to the country. I see savings of costs, which are, of course, and I think Mr. Stockman talked around that. No more subsidies, for example. So we can push all that money to quite a lot of other things, begging for development. I see a lot of reduced overheads in the administration of the sector itself. There will be guaranteed security of supply of quality products. What about jobs? Quite a lot of people who are really looking for jobs. This is an area. The upstream doesn't employ too many people. It's as you move downstream, midstream and downstream, that's actually where you actually get that kind of opportunity. And I see a lot of improved capacity to even sustain the sector. So if I conclude, one word is the fact that if this act gets on, I would say the downstream sector is completely open for business. And I think that's my last slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lorushola, for those very useful insights. I take from the critical success factors that you've highlighted, governance, corporate governance, and the industry must be run commercially. There's no other alternative. We need to discourage monopoly. Transgression of that principle keeps us where we are. Observance of that principle is illustrated in the telecommunications sector. Once upon a time, there was NITEL. Yeah. I think the newer generation need to be told that in the history books. But now, no one needs to do anything to own a phone.
Sure.
And of course, saving costs. Mr. Stockman talked about blowing up 600,000 housing units.
Sure.
Subsidizing consumption. And you can very well imagine the number of laborers, carpenters, masons you need to build 600,000 homes. The multiplier effect in the industry, mortgage financing, and so many other things, revenue for the state in terms of consent fees. So the summary is, to my mind, as you rightly captured, unchain, unlock the industry. Let me now invite the visionary of this whole OTL. Sakabo, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, the learned senior advocate, for the introduction. The discussions which we've had this morning have been very enriching, and the angle I want to come from is actually very specific. I don't want to put a dampener on any broad industry expectations, but I just want to put where we are in context. The direction in which I want to go is to just review where we are now, and with the context of where we are now, be able to define how we should address the anticipated Petroleum Industry Act, which is now a bill. So the outline is just to review announcements for deregulation which have been made this year by the government, and to determine if what we have is full deregulation, and then look at what needs to be done in reviewing and taking a position on the draft bill which we have now. On the 4th of June, what we had was the PPPRA initially announcing what it's called the market-based pricing regime for premium motor spirits, PMS, MBPRP regulations of 2020. By virtue of these regulations, the PPPRA removed the price cap per liter on PMS and also instituted the market-based pricing regime for petroleum products, by which it committed to monitor market trends and advise the NNPC and oil marketing companies on the monthly guiding market-based price for products. So essentially, at that point, it said it was essentially deregulating within the limits as envisaged under the Act, but that it will give a guiding price every month. It also directed that the price of premium motor spirits advised by the agency will be the only price that could be the basis for retail at the stations. Of course, after this announcement, there was a bit of controversy as to whether indeed there was full deregulation in view of the market guiding price which the PPPRA will be issuing. I'm aware that it issued a market guiding price for July, but it did not in August. By September, it also didn't. In fact, what we had in September was the PPMC issuing some kind of ex-depot, and the market operators seemed at that point to come up with a price of their own. And in the midst of a lot of confusion, the PPPRA eventually announced in September that it would no longer be involved in fixing the pump price of petrol. And it disclosed that the interplay of market forces and not the organization would, going forward, determine how much Nigerians pay for gasoline. So that's the situation. Now, is this, in essence, full deregulation as has been clamored by many Nigerians? The GMD of NNPC essentially thinks so, because at some point in the midst of the controversies, quite a number of people, including myself, were of the position that we actually need a full-blown change of the law for deregulation, truly speaking, to exist. Well, the GMD was of a contrary opinion. Rather, his position was that deregulation is a policy issue, and that it is not that petroleum product prices is not the subject of any law. Now the question is, let's fact check this. Is that the correct situation? It is not exactly the correct situation because, okay, I think my slide is a bit too small. Let me try and, okay, good. Sorry about that. Okay, I think I'll fix that. Sorry about that. So, so the question is, the position of the GMD, which is that deregulation is a question of policy and not a question of law. So to what extent is that correct? And upon review, I think the GMD is wrong. The petroleum prices in Nigeria, as a matter of law, are still controlled. So the announcement which we have seen from the government that there is full deregulation is just an announcement. Even if it has been implemented, it is important for the market to realize that it remains an announcement, because within the backdrop of the extant laws which we have, the laws provide for price fixing of petroleum products by the government. And until those laws are changed, anything which is being done now is really government pandering to probably market realities, fiscal and budgetary realities as at today. If it does turn out that there are a change of circumstances or social pressures which may put government on the back foot and desire to change that policy, the reality is that the government can indeed change that policy. And why do I say that? If you look at Section 6 of the Petroleum Act, the minister is able to fix prices at which petroleum products are sold today. Of course, we know that the Minister of Petroleum in Nigeria right now is the president. We look at Section 5 of the Price Control Act. The government can fix prices of goods, some goods, including petroleum products. And in fact, it would be a criminal offense to sell above such a fixed price. If you look at Section 9 of the Petroleum Act, the minister can determine the amount of crude oil to be supplied to a refinery and the price at which the refinery may sell its refined products. That is the fact under the current Petroleum Act. And of course, the PPPRA Act, which gives the PPPRA the power to periodically approve benchmark prices for all petroleum products. So that's the reality as at today. And the truth is, that is the reality going forward until we transit from the Petroleum Act and the existing legislation to the Petroleum Industry Act. I am very, very hopeful and would key into the enthusiasm expressed by Mr. Lawrence Shola in his presentation, where he has prophesied, if I may call it, that we're going to have a PIA in 2021. Of course, I'm a bit circumspect in that hope, knowing that this assertion has been made several times over in the last 10 years. But pending when that happens, we have to deal with the reality which involves looking at doing important due diligence. And that's why it may be that the market operators may still find it a bit difficult to proceed with imports if they want to ensure that all their borders are completely risk-free. Because if tomorrow government may wake up and by any idiosyncrasy go back to price capping, then the government will actually be acting within the law. If an oil marketing company has borrowed funds and has borrowed funds based on a benchmark price which is market driven, then in that kind of situation it may be on its own. So it is important for the market to still be a bit circumspect, and it is important for government to offer a bit more guarantees at this point in time, pending the passage of the Petroleum Industry Bill into law. And the guarantees may come in the form of having to gazette this policy, but in the short term, actually repealing the PPPRA Act and the PEF Acts and the Price Control Acts and the relevant provisions of the Petroleum Act immediately. That can be done by an executive bill, I believe, if that desire is really strong, so that it affords guarantees, and if it affords guarantees of investment. So it affords guarantees not just to trading, but to increase investment within this segment. And even from a refining point of view also. So that's just one of the points I needed to make. But as we grapple with that, it is important to take a position on the PIB, which we have in drafts and which has been submitted to the National Assembly at this time. The industry needs to engage on the PIB because we know that good enough, Mr. Lawrence Shola has given us the heads up that debates will comment on it very soon. And it's a huge document within which, if you skim through it and just take it for granted, you may find yourself being faced with a situation where very important issues which are hidden may also assail the industry later. Because many times, reading through it, I see some provisions, even though generally it seems that the bill has removed the key elements of regulation, like the bill doesn't make any provision for PPPRA and the PEF, and of course it will repeal the Petroleum Act, in which case it would have removed key regulatory provisions or key price regulatory provisions. But nonetheless, it is important to look at a couple of other provisions, which if you look at, it seems as if the bill is approbating and reprobating as far as price control by government is concerned. So an indicative one is clause 31D of the bill, which promotes a competitive market, which sets out as one of the objectives of the midstream and downstream authority, the promotion of a competitive market for midstream and downstream petroleum. That's all well and good, and that is in the spirit of deregulation. However, section 31, clause 31L makes provision for the authority to develop and enforce a framework on tariff and pricing for natural gas and petroleum products. So that framework, yes, it could be that the framework may be reinforcing the free competition in the market, but we don't know yet. And there are other provisions that we may look at to get a sense of what that framework is actually talking about. But it's important to note that somewhere else in the bill, there's provision for regulations and development of administrative and regulatory approaches to the frameworks for pricing, which would be included in the administration of that bill. And I find interesting clause 122, which indicates that in development of a pricing framework, the authority has to consult with the markets. But in sub 6 of that, it makes provision that notwithstanding earlier provisions which give the markets a right to being consulted, notwithstanding that, the authority may, due to the exigency of the circumstances, establish a tariff methodology without conducting the stakeholders' consultation where it considers it necessary to do so. Then 209 makes provision for certain public service obligations, as a result of which the authority may issue regulations imposing public service obligations on licensees. And by licensees, I mean people including retail owners and petroleum products marketers. So it may issue regulations imposing public service obligations on licensees or a class of licensees in relation to the maintenance of strategic stock forthwith, which the authority shall approve the tariff to be paid by the consumers. So this suggests that the authority may set a tariff, which is a price cap to be paid by consumers in respect of products which which are the subject of the market. So these are some, and there's quite a lot of other provisions which are hidden in quite a lot of subtext, which is important that the market is very familiar with, so that in the discussions of the PIB, the market can engage with these provisions. Actually, at our firm level, we are intending to do some stakeholder awareness briefing in about a couple of in a fortnight, so that these provisions can be reviewed in detail, and the market is able to take a very firm position from a position of knowledge as to how to engage on the bill. So at this point, I think I'll stop here now. I just wanted to address these key issues, being issues that the market should be aware of for the PIB, and some kind of reality check for the deregulation or the supposed deregulation which we now have. Thanks a lot, Mr. Chairman, and I think I'll stop at this point.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Akabo, for those very detailed analysis of some of the key legal points that affect the subject of our discussion. I would like to just note a few points which should serve as 4 questions before our audience put forward their questions. And I do invite you to please submit your questions. You will see the discuss button to the right. Please submit your questions, and we will ask the panelists to take those questions in no particular order, or at best the order in which they've come. But there's a point which, and it's a 4 question to the panelists. Mr. Kabogos rightly pointed us to the current Petroleum Act, where the minister has the power to fix prices. I have searched through that piece of legislation, and I couldn't find anywhere that the president or the minister of petroleum was empowered to fix the costs incurable in the industry. I didn't see a power to fix the exchange rate at which the industry procures products and services. They didn't have a power to fix the cost of international crude prices. There was no power to fix the salaries of expatriates and locals in the industry, nor to fix the cost of land and so many other things that were incurred. And what this tells me is that you will once again, once you cannot fix cost and you fix price, someone has to write the check. whatever difference. So back to subsidy. So how do you see the provisions of the Petroleum Industry Bill, again, in Section 122, that gives the authority the power again to fix tariffs? And of course, if the exigencies demand, and we know that voters are consumers, and some of them listen to the Nigerian Labour Congress. So I'll stop at that, and we will ask for questions from the audience. But I must thank Mr. Kabogo for highlighting this point, which is really at the, the underbelly of true regulation in the true sense of the word, and not just lip service. So I'm going to invite questions, but in no particular order. I invite any one of the panelists to pen down that point and see whether we can take it. I note that we have essentially 23 minutes, and we will try to take as many questions as we can. We'll take them in two waves of questions. So you have one, and I'm looking on to see if we have other questions posted by the audience. Let me just highlight from Mr. Stilian. Beta Kev has said, as long as NNPC's DSP exist, there cannot be genuine deregulation. And also, the Central Bank of Nigeria must merge, unify the different existing exchange rates into one unified market-driven exchange rate. It's a comment, but it's also a point for consideration. Dede Kadiri, CEO of Innovation Matters, has said that FX rates in Nigeria has been so tumultuous and impacted investments and profitability in the downstream. And the data shows it has informed more divestment than anything in the industry. So I will invite, in no particular order, the panelists to take this. So I'm going to ask Mr. Clement Isam, if that is fine by you, to go first with the two comments and questions. One being on when you fix price, but you cannot fix cost. The second one being Mr. Stephens and David Carrio's points. Mr. Isam, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me? Am I on?
Very well.
All right, so thank you for the question. I think it is correct. We have gone through the PIB, and we did notice the attempt to retain, to sneak in the right to continue to set the price. I use those words advisedly because the policy, as we know it today, as has been stated by everyone who is authorized to speak on behalf of government, is that we're moving away from price regulation. That is the stated policy. We have heard everybody state this policy. So to have written in the PIB to retain the power to set prices is at odds with the stated policy. We hope that we will take the opportunity of the bill going through the National Assembly to have these sections expunged. It is important because we are at a stage in which we are looking for foreign investment. Everybody who has participated in this industry before has gone through some pain as a result of the subsidy. Most of the subsidy was paid by the NNPC. A lot of the subsidy was paid for by the government, but every single operator in the industry has suffered as a result of not recovering its cost. So every single investor, and especially the banks, those that provide capital, will look at those provisions with some suspicion. If we want investors, if we want local and foreign capital, whether in terms of equity investment or private equity or any form of investment. What they will demand to see is a removal of that clause, the possibility that somebody else will set prices. We hope to be able to engage to make sure that that this happens. The other comment by what's his name? Billion on foreign exchange. That is a key point that we have continued to repeat ever since we started this process. All players, even the NNPC agrees, all players must have equal and equitable access to foreign exchange. It is when we have this equitable access that there can be a level playing field, that there can be competition, where any person, whether it is the dominant player in the market or any other participant in the market, can access foreign exchange at a cheaper rate than other players, then we are not talking about a free and competitive market. It is absolutely necessary, fundamental, that we know how to access foreign exchange and that we can access that foreign exchange at an equitable rate. I think I will leave it there for others to contribute. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Isan. So, Lauren Shola, you want to comment onto that as well?
Well, I wanted to support Clement in there, but also without necessarily holding brief for the executive, i.e. governments that actually put this bill together. You will realize that there's very limited bottoms-up engagement of inputs to drafting the bill. And somehow, I think government just wanted to do it that way. At the point of transmitting it to the National Assembly, one of the key things they said clearly to us as advisors was that, look, we didn't engage people. So as part of your legislative process to get this done, please try as much as possible to engage with all the key stakeholders. So it will, I'm not surprised now that, yes, we have seen quite a bit of gap here and there, but that's exactly what I was saying. If we can then put that back as value add, I don't think the drafters of the bill will be very unhappy with that at all. And apart from that, even I have gone through myself and I see quite a lot of drafting issues, quite a lot of inconsistencies here and there. Now we have let's see what we can do to close those gaps as much as we can. That's all I just wanted to say. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Salon Chola. Those are very useful comments. Now, let me just mention that you've got polls. I invite you to take a look at the polls segment by the right side of your screen. And please participate in the polls. You will find the questions and we'd like to get your feedback. It's important to OTL. Now, we've got some more questions. Mohammed Tukul says, the question is, do you think the linking of rail and ports can reduce the logistics costs of transporting products? Now, aligned to this is another question, and this time is from Jumat Raji. It says, many stakeholders hold strongly that new investment in the oil sector is dependent on the passage of the EIB. Please advise to investors, please. And the third question which I would ask is, what I'll put forward is from the same Dede Kadiri. And his concern is that the driving spirit of the Petroleum Act is government participation in the PMS, control of PMS pricing. And it sees that this is an increasing quest by government to be relevant in the PMS pricing. Its concern is, do you see that spirit shifting to the PIB, and do you consider this to be a red flag or not? Those are the three questions, and I'm going to ask Mr. Oyebanji to give a shot at one or more of those questions. And after that, Mr. Emeka Kabo will take what is left unanswered. Thank you. Mr. Oyebanji.
Okay, thank you, moderator. Let me first talk a bit about investment and PIB. Of course, and when you pass a law that includes what you might describe as mindful, it begins to affect the in going the whole hog to make a lot.
Well, I don't know. Humility tells me to check whether I'm the one who is breaking
No doubt
up.
about it. You make
First,
running into
Mr.
billions of
Oyebanji.
dollars, and then suddenly you find yourself handicapped. Suddenly, the minister then can come and, undermines the very spirit as supposed to be looking at as far as the PIB is concerned. And ports costs. There's no doubt that in many parts of the world, the major means of moving petroleum products are either first through pipelines, that is, then to maybe a second option would be through. Obviously, in both cases in Nigeria,
All right. Let me ask now, whilst we
through that particular medium. Of course, pipelines would actually have been the best, but again, we need significant investments to repair the existing pipeline network and to create new investment. So, the simple answer to that question is that yes, it would make things better. It should invariably mean reduce costs for the logistics, but definitely there's going to be there's a loan would be in a position to make all the investments required will be such that it's going to encourage the massive investment required within the industry.
Thank you very much, Oyebanji, for those clear answers. I'm going to ask Mr. Kabogo, if you can hear me, to maybe just intervene a bit on some of those questions as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Yeah, Mr. Imbanjo, I agree with you. Unfortunately, you broke off a couple of times in the course of your intervention. But I think that without doubt, investments must be on the strength of certainty and assurances. Local investments or foreign investments. Without assurances and without certainty, in fact, we know very clearly that international investors are looking to protect their investments. And that is why many times some of them request for sovereign guarantees, which within our political space is often just misinterpreted. But the protections which are sought are protections which are valid and indeed which are necessary in ensuring that you've got a watertight documentation for such a transaction. So if we have a legal framework, as we do now, which does not guarantee returns on investment, you won't have investment. It's simple. Those who are investing solely on basis of hope, in some cases, patronage, political patronage, but not on the basis of clear numbers which are known would stay the course. And when numbers cannot stay the course, then you have no basis for investment. So that's what, as it goes for investment. But indeed, that certainty of a legal framework applies not just to the petroleum products marketing business per se, but the associated logistics elements, which have been raised by the gentleman who asks about the ports and rail. If you have a multimodal transport system which facilitates movement of products from the quayside or from the depot onto tankers which are moved by rail to the hinterlands, or straight into pipelines, pipeline network which works, which is connected, which is safe, then certainly the logistics costs will reduce significantly. But then again, you need investment in that rail network, you need investment in that pipeline network. So there are questions of both a business or a commercial character and indeed of a political character. In Nigeria today, we're talking about the Constitution, review of key aspects of the Constitution, including things on the exclusive list. We need to make it easier for individuals, organizations to get licenses to invest in rail systems, and not just government, but to get licenses to invest in rail systems under a framework that the government leads, of course, to be able to invest in pipelines. And these investments will only, of course, be achieved if we have constitutional guarantees which provide that. And in addition, we have laws which protect these investments. So just for short, investments can only be protected if we tinker with our laws to guarantee those protections. Our laws, as they are currently constituted, will not protect investments and will continue hampering these investments. That's my position.
Thank you very much. I also do align with those views. We have a question from Isaac Anyobu, and he says, the labor groups argue that even as you push for food deregulation, there doesn't seem to be much interest by downstream players to invest in refining. What plans are there by groups like Moman to add value to crude oil investing in country? I know that question naturally goes to the Executive Secretary of Moman, but then I'm going to put forward just one more question. And this question is basically one that seeks to deal with the question of safety. And that should go to Mr. Yebanji for self-regulation. Mr. Ayo Adebusoye's concern is that with one of the largest refineries in the world coming up in Lagos, the Dangote refinery, his concerns are for what is being done in terms of global standards of safety in a country where he fears has gotten used to cutting corners on issues that might affect safety. So, Mr. Isom, you first.
Okay, thank you. What we know is that Dangote Refinery should begin production in the next couple of months, in about a year. This refinery will produce 650,000 barrels per day. BUA has announced a refinery that will come up in the south, the far east of the country. We have a couple of modular refineries which are coming up. NNPC has announced that it will refurbish, rebuild its 4 refineries. What these refineries actually need from us, and they have been talking to us. We've spoken to one of the people who are planning to co-locate with NNPC's refinery in Port Harcourt. What they require from us is that we will collectively buy from them to keep them running. I think we have enough refineries in the pipeline to make Nigeria a hub for refining in Africa. We have enough refineries in the pipeline that will produce enough product, not just for us to use locally in the country, but will also export these products. What Moman will be in that universe is we because of our distribution expertise, what we will bring is the ability to evacuate that product both within the country and to participate in trading outside the country, to bring our expertise, our connections, our network to making Nigeria extremely strong in competition in the Africa Continental Free Trade Arrangement. So we do have enough refineries in the pipeline that are ready to be built, and MoMA will bring its support and its to those refineries in that manner, as will other associations engaged in the distribution in the downstream industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Ebanji, 30 seconds to a minute if you can, because we have to wrap up by 12 noon on the dot. Thank you.
Oh, okay. I think Clement has really said it all. Again, people also have to understand that refining is a global business. In fact, in many countries, many of the major international oil companies are actually closing down refineries. We shouldn't look at it as if there must be a limit or balance between what we have as local demand and the international market that we're seeking to serve from Nigeria. So it's not just about throwing money at refining, but there's even the argument, some of the smaller modular refineries, can they really be competitive if, say, all the NNPC refineries were working, and the Dangote refinery and the BUA refinery, which are much bigger operations? Can these very small marginal refineries operate? So it's not as simple as that. At the end of the day, it's a purely economic consideration based on the global refining market.
Thank you very much. Very apt. Now there's a question, and it's a very simple question, but a very powerful one. Janet Olainka, who's a biochemist by profession, her question is simple. With everything we've talked about today, are there employment opportunities for the youth, especially for her as a young graduate without a godfather? And she wants to say, can she be employed in this industry without a connection, unquote. And just before any one of us takes this answer, I would like to just point out that we're not discriminating against Mr. Stockman. He had to crave our indulgence to exit, as he promised, only a few minutes ago. So that's why we haven't sent any questions to him. So who would like to, Mr. Lorunshola, I'm going to visit you with this question because you're a man of faith You've espoused your faith. And I think with that comes hope. So it would be good to answer Ms. Janet Olainka's question.
Thank you, Prof. And if you just, if Janet can just go back to, I think it's my second to the last slide when I talked about the benefits of all these interventions to the sector and to the country at large. I talked about 6 benefits. One of the core one is jobs. I just call it jobs, jobs, jobs. And I specifically mentioned the fact that unlike the upstream, which is very, very shy of employment in terms of numbers, as you move towards the midstream as well as the downstream, a lot more opportunity avail the sector. I mean, if you've just talked about refineries, for example, I mean, if you by as of last week, for example, we had wanted to commission 2 modular refineries, one in Imo State and one in Rivers State. But for the protests, we kind of shifted it a little bit. But when we even looked at the kind of levels of employment we'll be looking at, given the fact that you operate 24 hours a day, you have rotational, shift type of work, it's a lot of opportunities, and I hear the concerns around if you don't know somebody or know somebody. Certainly, we don't belong to that kind of school of thought. Once the opportunity space opens, I will advise Janet to shoot for it. And if you like, you can contact me directly.
Thank you very much for that clear answer and message of hope. Ladies and gentlemen, a promise is a promise. We will not keep you longer than pledged. But I will ask you to please use the last few minutes or seconds to take the poll. And the poll is just right there by the right corner of your screen. It's important that you have a voice, and that voice is factored into the good work that OTL has consistently done over the past years and continues to do. OTL has become recognized as a strong influencer in policy and implementation, listened to by industry players, listened to by the regulators and all stakeholders, and your voice is important. Let me, whilst you do that, use the opportunity to thank our very eminent panelists who are industry players. They have been in regulation, they have participated in governance and leadership of some of the most successful downstream players and even upstream at some point. So I will start with Mr. Stockman, who is now not here. Hob Stockman, CEO of OVH Energy. Thank you. I would also acknowledge the good contributions of Mr. Adetunji Oyebanji, Managing Director, 11 PLC, formerly Mobile. Mr. Austin Olorunshola, Chairman of the Energy Institute. And also Mr. Clement Ison, Executive Secretary of MoMAN. And last but, of course, not the least, and the visionary of OTL, the senior partner of Akabogo and Associates, Mr. Emeka Akabogo. I must thank the OTL team. It's not easy to have this level of sophisticated, all interactive conference. If you've been to OTL, you know that this is our own OTC. We're proud of it. It's something that has come from Nigeria and has been extremely successful over the years. And what this year has tried to do is to create this conference via this platform, far more sophisticated than you and I's typical Zoom conference. No disrespect to Zoom, but it has been very well organized. And I'd like to thank you all, the back office, who has, has been very supportive. Toby and your crew. Thank you very much. It's been my delight to chair and moderate this session. My name is Fabian Ajo, and this is at the point where I ask that we bring this session to a close unless any panelist wishes to overrule and make one more comment. Thank you very much.